In the video that follows, you will see that I posted about this guy back in January of this year, and I speculated he might be convicted in the fall based on his planets, most notably his Taurus planets, because that is where Saturn and Uranus have been exerting pressure. However, now his problem is that after being convicted, he's not going to be sentenced, and the planets have moved forward. Saturn specifically is going to be entering Pisces in 2023. And as we move toward 2024, it's going to be on a Saturn return, a place from which it opposes Mars, Uranus, and Pluto. And I mentioned in that January video that people like this, with Saturn opposing planets like Uranus and Pluto, tend to be this way. They oppose established structures, and they're not afraid to do it violently, as was the case with this guy, and for which he has now been convicted. To understand this, for example, you can look to periods in history when Saturn opposes Pluto in its transit. One of those periods is 9/11. Very similar approach, different type of thing, but it's that idea of taking something down in a spectacular way, definitely in a I'm against this type of way, meaning they represent the Plutonian force opposing Saturn, which is the government itself. This also was true during the 1960s, when there was a lot of unrest in the US. Back then, Pluto was transiting through Virgo and Saturn was in Pisces. That's where that opposition was. My feeling is that he is very likely to find himself in the slammer in these upcoming years, although we do have to keep one possibility in mind around getting a softer sentence if the punishment is not forthcoming until after next spring of 23, then Jupiter will be going into Taurus, which is his sun sign, and that would help him, probably. The reason I say that is Jupiter on your sun is always good. However, you don't know his birth time. So there's also a possibility that with certain birth times, the situation could be so complicated that about the only thing he's going to get from Jupiter and Taurus is perhaps a period when he's comfortable in prison, rather than being uncomfortable, which is much more the case by the time you get into 2024, because then Saturn is solidly in its position, opposing Uranus, Mars, and Pluto, and that seldom feels good. So, bottom line though, I would say that this is an example of what I would call fair justice. This guy definitely deserves to be convicted for what he did. And I'm reading that it may not be good news for those who are connected to this whole affair. Namely, for example, Trump ally Roger Stone and all of these people that have been, in one way or another, enmeshed in this attempted coup that took place in early 2021, but which was planned already in 2020. And I'll end by saying that as far as I'm concerned, I hope he gets as close to the 20 years he may get for what he did, because let's face it, this kind of behavior should be very strongly discouraged for obvious reasons. Thank you to those who left me the Seditionists' birthday information in the comments, as well as the 2 people that emailed me the same thing. I've used this to draw his chart, and searching a little more online, I discovered he's born in California, so I'm drawing it for Los Angeles, but I don't really know the city. Still, it gives me a pretty good general chart showing an Aries moon between 10 and 24 plus, that describes, the militaristic, aggressive approach this guy takes. That moon, if he's born very late in the day, could also correlate with the Pluto energy challenging it from Capricorn. However, statistically, that's unlikely because you'd have to born in the last hour or two. Chances are he isn't. The more obvious correlation is the Venus in Taurus, ruler of his sun sign, because as he is being arrested, Saturn is pretty much precisely squaring that Venus from Aquarius, and Uranus is in Taurus itself, triggering the Venus as well. Uranus is not exactly there now, but it already crossed those degrees, so basically it's in play. The thing is, while Saturn will leave by next month, it'll still catch the Neptune degrees late in the year, fall and into early winter. And meanwhile, Uranus stays with those degrees all the way until 2024. So there's plenty of runway for this guy to find himself in deep, deep trouble. Probably, if you had to guess, you would say probably the fall when Saturn stations, because Saturn tends to be the type of planet that really takes you down on matters of accountability, but there is runway beyond that going into 2024, most especially because you notice he has the Saturn in Pisces, so he'll be in the return of that Saturn starting in 2023, but going into 2024 as well. Now, something you can see with this chart is that the Saturn opposition to those planets in Virgo, especially Uranus and Pluto, is an excellent correlation for this type of temperament, this type of individual, because these are people that basically dislike government, they dislike organizations, they dislike anything they perceive to be an institution telling them what to do. And of course they process it through their ideology, which in this case is clearly racist. This guy came online, so to speak, around when Obama was elected, which tells you everything you need to know. And then he progressed to this level where under Trump, he became fully radicalized and undertook a traitorous, seditious act, for which he is now almost certainly going to be in a whole lot of trouble because, according to legal experts, the statute that prohibits this kind of behavior, he pretty much walked into, so to speak. It fulfills all the requirements for being convicted. So, very good chance that this guy gets himself in a whole lot of trouble, and one way to look at it would be that he might be spending his Saturn return behind bars, which, to be honest, is where I think he belongs.